Welcome to another episode of Presence Practice with Poonam and Parker. Hey Poonam, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Parker, as always.
Yes. So today's episode is forgiving child abuse. Forgiving child abuse. A lot of people that are waking up right now have experienced trauma. Some are waking up and they're still in traumatic experiences, but we're going to focus on forgiving child abuse in this episode because there are stories out there that we're still carrying around or could be still carrying around with us. And so I want to speak to you from this absolute perspective. The relative perspective is chaotic, and there may be doings that need to happen. But from an absolute perspective, I just want to chat a bit with you about forgiving. What does it mean to forgive something that's heavy, something that's rippled out into this story, this dream that we're in? And it's so I'll speak personally, and I know that myself, Poonam and Eckhart too have had tremendous childhood suffering, which brought us to this place of waking up and recognizing that nothing is out of order. And by recognize, I mean to sense it, to feel that deeply. This is a deep realization that no one can act beyond their level of consciousness. So if you're ready to hear that, you'll be able to hear that. So as are many teachings misunderstood, oftentimes they're misunderstood because the person that's listening isn't it fully developed into their presence practice yet, or they're not awake yet. So there'll be a misunderstanding about what it means to say something like, there's nothing to forgive, that no one can act beyond their level of consciousness. So they may say, well, they knew better. They had to know better. They had to. Everybody knows that you shouldn't behave this way or treat a little child when you have all the power and control. So they did. Well, there's a chasm between what we may know and how we behave. That's the state of growing. There's bits of it until we get to a place of waking up. And if a person is deeply unconscious, then who knows how that unconsciousness will manifest. And it can manifest in ways that can feel evil. So one, we recognize that we've brought along this whole luggage set of stories of trauma, and we've tumbled through a good number of years of our lives reactively and responding to this trauma and all the unconscious thoughts that are built up over time. And then we can stop when we're waking up if we recognize deeply that these people that did the abusing could not have done better than how they did. Then we'll be able to let it go. How do I know they couldn't have done better? Because they didn't. They didn't. When we allow these contracted positions that we have on our victimness to sit in place, and we don't release these stories, we don't recognize the insanity of holding on to them, when we don't forgive the entire situation, when we don't realize deeply that our memories are flawed, and that these singular traumatic moments that happened over and over again have layered these stories, and then as adults we add to those stories because we don't tend to move directly into a healthy position as soon as we're outside of an abusive relationship or abusive situation with our parents. So I'm going to read to you what Eckhart has to say about this. As long as you're unable to access the power of now, every emotional pain that you experience leaves behind a residue of pain that lives on in you. It merges with the pain from the past, which was already there, and becomes lodged in your mind and body. This, of course, includes the pain you suffered as a child, caused by the unconsciousness of the world in which you were born. This accumulated pain is a negative energy field that occupies your body and mind. If you look on it as an invisible entity in its own right, you're getting quite close to the truth. It's the emotional pain body. So the pain body has two modes of being, dormant and active. It may be dormant 90% of the time in a deeply unhappy person, though it may be active up to 100% of the time. Some people live almost entirely through their pain body, while others may experience it only in certain situations, such as intimate relationships or situations linked with past loss or abandonment, physical or emotional hurt, and so on. Anything can trigger it, particularly if it resonates with a pain pattern from your past. When it is ready to awaken from its dormant states, even a thought or an innocent remark made by someone close to you can activate it. So he's talking really there about turning and facing the old past pain, the dormant pain. This is what he's discussing in this passage. So for me, one of the things I noticed when I had a deep realization that all of the trauma and abuse, all these stories that I was carrying around with me were had created sort of these waves and ripples that were coming into my experience that reflected the very same trauma. So I was living this trauma over and over and over again, very destructive in the world. And so when I could lay down this story and stop focusing on where this started or where it came from and realigned myself to what's going on right now and what are these patterns that are unfolding inside of me. And it's Marianne Williamson has something to say on this. I had this was hanging in the yoga room for the group people, and I'll read it to you. Until we have met the monsters in ourselves, we will keep trying to slay them in the outer world. For all darkness in the world stems from darkness in the heart, and it is there we must do our work. So it's wonderful when you can draw all of your energy back into your body. You've liberated. You no longer have to ask why did these things happen anymore. You recognize that these are stories from the past. You recognize that these people could not operate beyond their level of consciousness. You tenderly hold the little you that was out of had no power, was powerless to these situations. You came into this life and you tumbled through this life, and then you begin to discover what this has made, the unique being that you are, and the loving kindness, compassion that's been developed in your heart, and most importantly, the opportunity to awaken, for the exterior of the shell of our ego to get cracked. So we're no longer just the victim in this situation. We're able to see what are we splashing about energetically in the world. For me, it was anger, manipulation, dishonesty. Right, you could see I got to witness the impulse underneath these things and examine it like a scientist without the reactivity in the stories. So we stop blaming, we stop complaining, we stop. There's a maturity of our soul, a maturity of our soul. So maybe we come into this lifetime and we're ready for these big doses of suffering, so that we can the crack in the shell of the ego can happen, and there's a maturing, a blooming that happens. And so bringing in presence practice, Eckhart, he explains that accessing presence in that formless dimension, it burns up this accumulation of pain and suffering from trauma. And then we move within. We can see how it manifests in the world, and we liberate these enormous doses of suffering. We have these big waves that come as we tumble through our lives, unconsciously bleeding out anger and rage and self-righteousness and stories and complaining, and then we have an opportunity to move into, it's very placid. So the circumstances of our life can keep going, but our experiences of them are completely different. We are liberated from the suffering. We suffer so much that we lay the suffering down. I know I just said a lot, and I would love to hear what Poonam has to say on this topic as well.
I think it's if we are totally in our mind energy, which is the pattern of humans for the past 200, 300 years, we cannot see this forgiveness. Forgiveness will sound like, oh, she's just brushing it off, right? Any human that hears that the answer to all of this is forgiveness, and true forgiveness. So like for me, my childhood was, so every human has to see that. How am I co-creating this abuse? And when we grow older, the abuse may not be like, okay, if the mother or father was hitting or had explosive anger, like in Eckhart's dad's case, he had an explosive anger, right? So Eckhart is going to experience, until he grows up and truly forgives his dad, that explosive anger in different people, right? The same was the case with me. I saw that explosive anger in my marriage. The true forgiveness happened when, and we experience the abuse on and off in different ways. Somebody may not give you a promotion. Some credit card company will abuse you by charging you. The abuse may not always be back to the physical abuse. Does that make sense, Parker?
Well,
That
when yeah,
that the abuse may come in different forms. It no longer may be that somebody's hitting you every day or verbally abusing you every day, but it may be that your boss is making you work hours together and you're not getting any compensation, no approval, and they're totally ignoring you. That could be abuse. So for me, one of the years I actually forgave my manager. He actually harassed me sexually um, through messages and emails. And we used to travel for our job. So he would say, why don't you come up? Why didn't you come up to my room? Something like that, right? I made that was my start of my spiritual journey. So I made a conscious effort not to, that this one time I am going to make a conscious effort of not holding any documentation about this person. I'm going to delete every instant message. I'm going to delete every email. I understand that they are, I kind of thought it was like some kind of infatuation or something. So I deleted everything. And I realized after that, I've never experienced any form of abuse. And that was the true forgiveness. that this time, yeah, I had resentment for my mom when I was growing up. So that resentment caused more abuse, right? Like she would hit more, verbal abuse more resentment, more, the violence would increase. The same thing happened. And so I moved from a mom that was abusive to a husband that was abusive, right? So we co-created that. I co-created that. I totally take responsibility of my pain body attracting all that, right? And that's the thing about awareness. When we have enough presence power, we can reflect back and see how we attracted all of that in our life, right? And I know what point it turned. I was not even an Eckhart follower. I just did it based on the fact that I had moved into a very spiritual direction. Now, when this one time, I am going to completely forgive this person. And it was like incredible. That quantum leap was you know how Eckhart says that you have to make a shift in your consciousness. That was one quantum leap that I made in my shifting of my consciousness, that I truly learned how to let go of resentment. And now that, with meditation and presence practice, I have enough presence power that even with my mother, anybody in this world, there is no resentment anymore. And that is what is needed, is work on your presence practice so that we generate enough presence. When Eckhart truly says, learn that there's nothing to forgive. Ultimate understanding is whatever happened to me happened to my body or my mind, but my radiant essence was the end of the power of now. My radiant essence was never touched. That is true
Yes.
forgiveness.
Yes, this is the core of it all, what you've just said there. I want to say that it's also a very beautiful experience to recognize how our unconsciousness is destructive and hurtful in the world oftentimes when we come out of these uh, out of these experiences, and how for so long we won't take responsibility for it either. We can just keep blaming this original set of circumstances, but to be able to not worry about what other people are doing or not doing. And I love the way you said that you withdrew all your attention away from this man and his situation and said no to each one. Imagine like a little energy volt coming in to touch you, and you're saying no. But the most important thing is what we're doing within, not how we're able to manipulate some circumstances in the world, or to deflect this or attract the better circumstances. It's about how we're able to accept fully everything as it's been, and that it could not be otherwise. Otherwise it would be. And that we move now in a new liberated state of consciousness, much, much freer, allowing everything to be as it is. I also want to remind people that are orphaned in the world through there's got to be a lot of sets of circumstances to happen for someone to end up 20 years old and without a family, and it happens all the time, either by choice or just by circumstances. But something that emerges in stillness is a lot of self-mothering, or a lot of that loving, compassionate energy that we take into our heart as we're burning up, turning towards these things that we potentially have run from our entire life, that we remember to be gentle with ourselves. So when we witness our unconscious patterns, that we don't do the ego doesn't do a lateral move into shame and guilt. and self-flogging, and now we're down here and making whole new stories up to carry around with us. So I very much want to encourage us to hold ourselves with such tenderness and compassion, and to allow a new, different, dynamic kind of family like the one you're experiencing here to open up for you, and to know that you're seen and cared for, and that there are meditators around the world that are offering you love and healing and help and recognition. They're saying, I can see you. And we're saying that here as well, and that we walk with you as friends in solidarity. Thank you.